So just before we kicked off, like Catherine already said, Bartwin and myself are business consultants for a long time now. And we are surprised how many organizations start off their transformation, whether it's an agile transformation or a transformation in what sort of ways of working or ways of thinking you can imagine. And we saw something happening during the many engagements that we were part of. And that made us think, especially during our first lockdown in New Zealand, that happened in the end of March of this year. And we came up with something that we think is so profound, you all need to know it in order to actually change something in organizations. Before we start around that, I want to introduce to you my friend and my colleague as well, Bartwin, and I will introduce myself later on, just so that you get a feeling that we kind of know what we're talking about. So Bartwin, over to you to introduce you.
Thanks. So here's some information on myself on the screen. Whenever I meet somebody, it feels like the first question they would have is like, is that an actual name or did you just made that name up? So I just thought it would best to clear that up. It is my real name, but I'm very open about interpretation. So if you want to call me Martin or Bart or some other kind of deviation of the name, I'm okay with that. As Marcella said, I'm also from the Netherlands. You could probably hear from my flawless accent. Business consultant and agile coach, and I work mainly for management coaching, team development, leadership. And I thought it would also be nice to include something personal. So I'm very keen on anything that has to do with TV series. I wrote reviews for a large review site. It's music or storytelling. So if you're dying for that next Netflix tip or whatever you fancy, then send me a message. Of course, something related to the topic of today would also be nice, but that's totally up to you.
Awesome, thanks. So I am Marcella. I'm as well a business consultant or agile coach or scrum master or whatever label you want to put on it. I'm also from the Netherlands. I also have a flawless accent, so you probably recognize that already. I started off my complete agile journey around 8 years ago. Started off as being a developer. Pretty soon I recognized that that's not really what I want to do and what I'm really good at. So I changed roles, functions, organizations. I did everything. And for the last few years, I think now 5-6 years, I've been working as a full-time agile coach, and I help lots of organizations through their agile transformation. I'm not your typical coach. I don't really like to follow any guides or explain why the guides tells a really good, realistic view of the world. I understand really well that we are living in a realistic day-to-day world where we need to change something else that's been written down. That said, I am extremely passionate about everything that comes with change. So not just the new ways of working, but everything that has to do with the brain. So a lot of focus in my day-to-day work as a coach I do around personal coaching, leadership coaching. That has all to do with behaviors, mindset, culture, that kind of change during a transformation. I'm also really passionate about psychology and neuroscience. That's why we have a really cool understanding around what we think is major to why a lot of organizations tend to actually fail as soon as they initiate any change. So enough about us. We're going to guide you through what we think is the key ingredients why some organizations do change, but lots of organizations actually don't change because they're missing that key ingredient. So what I want you guys to do is either think about or write something down on a piece of paper that you have in front of you. And I want you to think back of your latest projects that you have been or that you have been part of. And think about these questions. So first off, how would you grade your own productivity and effort within the project? You can write it down if you want to. You can put it in the chat box. Think about what kind of grade would you give yourself, how you acted and behaved during the project. Now think about how you would grade the effort and productivity of one of your team members. Write it down too. The third question, before you started on your project, did you believe that the project was going to be a success? So, of course, looking back to it, you will probably have a really clear answer for that, but look back at the first moment that you heard or kicked off your new project, and did you actually believe that the project was going to be a success from the start? Okay, write it down. I will come back later on. So keep your notes to yourself and make sure you will keep track of them during the presentation. The last question that I want you either to think about or write down: what were the results at the end of the project? Was it a success or did it fail for some sort of reason? But what were the results? Think of it, write it down. You can pick any project that comes up in your mind. It's all good. And I will make sure I will get back to it later on. All right. Bartwin.
Yes. So while you're jotting down those answers to those interesting questions, I would like to take you back to the reason for our bit of research and the reason for our writing. Being business consultants and agile coaches and being in this area, we were struck by the question of why do these transformations fail? So how come that so many companies are working on a transformation, on trying to change, spend a lot of money on it, and then seem to fail in the end or underperform to their expectations? So as I say research, you probably know that there has been quite a bit of research written around about transformations and why they fail, or at least the rate at which they fail. But we just picked out one key statistic for you to think about, and that's this one. If you're looking at the amount of companies trying to make or acting or executing a big transformation, you would see that in the US alone, 93% of the companies are working on change, trying to transform as an organization. And in the light of the current COVID affairs and how that is affecting our economy, you would maybe state even 100% of the companies, even in the world, are thinking about changing, adapting, or pivoting to the new demands of the market. So, and with that change comes a lot of money being spent. And the amount that you see on the screen, the 10 billion US dollars yearly, is just on management consultancy fees alone. So that is not even including the changes that you make within the company and the cost and expense that you have on that area. So that is a lot of money being spent on change. So we would think if so many companies are working on change, you would have all the best brains in the world. And I'm saying that without trying to be funny here, but you have very smart people working in the consultancy business, very educated people who know and have done their homework and are very aware and talented working on that change. You still see that there is a big number of failure of those changes. That leads us to a conclusion, or to let this research that we're quoting, to a 74% failure rate. So if you think about those numbers, then it becomes an interesting question. Why do these transformations fail? And this led us to the next question, which is, if we are thinking about, so Marcella and I were thinking about this stuff, when organizations come to us as an Agile coach, and we asked our colleagues, and we did a bit of canvassing, organizations ask mainly for these things. And do elaborate us a bit of space here, because we trying to, this is trying to be black and white here to make a point. In generally speaking, they're asking us to please explain us the fundamentals of Agile, or in layman's terms, they're all speaking the same language within the company. So if we have a daily scrum, but everybody knows what we're talking about, just to dumb it down. And then give us an action plan on how to implement that into our environment. And obviously coach and consult us during this implementation phase. And then the transformation would be complete, right? That would then constitute for us that we are at the right point for our transformation. And in a sense, in itself, it does make sense. You would like everybody in the company to speak the same language, or at least understand the same thing that you are trying to point out when you're trying to transform or change. You would like an action plan on how to implement it into your environment, due to your context or where your company is at. And you would need some coaching and consultancy during that implementation phase. So these questions are not outlandish or weird. They are very common in a transformation or change. However, that last part, transformation complete, when we look back at those numbers again in the previous slide, you would see that something is missing. And that's where we were starting off our thinking, what would be that missing piece?
Yeah. So what Bartwin mentioned, and when we started off during our research around this, why a lot of change initiatives in organizations tend to fail. And if you look back at the previous slide, like what organizations, what leadership teams most of the time ask us as consultants to do, is focus a lot on getting a driver into place. So what a driver is purely a roadmap on where to go, what kind of goals do we want to achieve, and make our journey towards our goal. Most of the time we set our driver, that becomes really the motivator of the change that an organization wants to go through. So they're really clear on why they want to change in a driver. We spend lots of time to actually help and coach leadership teams to come to the core of why they want to change. A lot of the initiatives around change are based, especially in Agile, are based on either getting faster, getting a quicker time to market, or just because everyone is doing it and they feel like they need to be on board on the Agile train. So we often start off as business consultants to guide an organization towards why do you want to change, and we set up that driver. We make a clear roadmap on where are they now and where do they want to go, and we set milestones in that plan to actually celebrate successes as soon as they reach those milestones. And I'm talking to an audience that understands Agile, so you also understand that it often is implemented in an iterative way of working. So whether it's Scrum or something else, but it is most of the time related on the empirical processes. So all around getting that feedback. So this is the first thing that we actually do. Then there is another thing that we do, and that is actions. We need to make clear as soon as we have our driver, so as soon as we have our plan, our roadmap towards our goals, we need to make sure that we get the right actions into place. So it changes from having the plan more towards, okay, what are we then going to do? So the teams are picking a ways of working like Scrum or Kanban. Some organizations choose to do a safe implementation, but the looking at frameworks and ways of working are getting more clear if you take a look at the more action part. So we connect the right motivation that gets the people into action. And And what is really necessary if you are looking at changing a organization or to initiate any change within your teams, maybe, it is really necessary to look at also what kind of language you use. So it's not just pick a framework and that's it, but setting the language in your own organization, in your team. So one of the things that we discovered during interviews that we've done with several organizations and on several levels is that there is one major thing that actually gets people into action for this type of change. And that is the part of the skin in the game. As soon as a person, an individual or a team doesn't feel like having skin in the game, they will be less motivated to actually come into action. And they will probably just do a Scrum framework, do the Scrum events just for the sake of doing it. But they are not really affected by the fact if they don't do it or if it fails or becomes a success. That also relates to team sizes, which you probably all have been reading about or you heard about it. A lot of research has been done around the size of a team, what's the most effective and efficient size of a team. And it's also something that organizations need to take into account if they go from your driver to your action part of your transformation. But, and this is where it gets more interesting. If we take a look at how we work within transformations, you have your driver and your action. And this is most of the time where coaches and consultancy companies focus on. We get into an organization, we focus on making a plan how to reach their transformation goals, and we make sure we support them, guide them, facilitate them by getting the actions into place. And this is where we got feedback around the people that we talked to during our engagements, that this actually creates the 74% failure in change initiatives. Even if your plan is so clear how to do it, what your milestones are, and what kind of actions you need to take to get into your transformation mindset, there is something missing. And that something is, for our perspective, is what we found during our engagements in the last 10, 15 years that we've done this together. And it's a key element. So the thing is, and I will talk to you what it is, what we see missing in lots of organizations, is that if you take a look at the Agile mindset and the Agile on a more individual level, people want to change if they understand the why. So if the driver of your transformation or your change initiative is clear, people want to change. They want to join. That it needs a next level step into this, and this is where we kick in with a more change 2.0 kind of experience. Because in order to change, we need to actually believe that we can do it. And this is where it gets to our point that we want to make.
Yes, as you can see by this slide, we have tried to communicate these three different elements. When we were thinking about change, we were thinking initially about leadership. So whenever you were in a transformation in a company, oftentimes you would hear, we're doing great as a team, but only if leadership or management would also act on this change, that would be great. So it's not as much us, it's more leadership. So when we're thinking about the topic of leadership, we think, what does leadership actually mean? And when you're thinking about leadership, it basically boils down to ownership. And that ownership, if you're trying to unwrap that, you will get to these three elements. So when does a person take ownership? When does a person take the lead into something? Well, obviously you need a driver and you do need that action component, because without action, nothing happens. But a deciding factor within that threefold approach is the amount of belief that a person actually has in that change, in the things that we need to do. And that is what creates that ownership. So our point in this presentation is to focus on that belief being a part of ownership. And we think that a large part of organizations fail in the transformations and their change, not due to the fact that they have a bad driver or a bad action plan in place, or they're not doing enough about it. But in essence, what it really boils down to is that they really have difficulty believing is needed, or whatever they are doing will not constitute, will not lead to an actual change. And this is an interesting dynamic when you start to unpack it, because when you start to notice this or think about this threefold approach towards ownership, then you maybe will recognize some of these statements that we've written down for you that would show you some of the belief, or rather unbelief, that's underlying. So maybe you've heard one of these statements in your line of work. I will believe it when I see it, obviously being one of the strongest contenders for the level of belief in ownership. Or the if this fails, we'll try something new, right? So it doesn't really matter. So we'll just try this agile stuff. And if it doesn't work, sure, we'll pivot to blue ocean strategy, or I don't know, something else that you can think of that will probably bring about the next big change. Or let's talk again about this change after you got the teams working. So a one that leaders would many times utter towards you when you're trying to up the game and talk about leadership, about the change in the company. And maybe you can think of a belief statement that you've also heard in your work when trying to coach or consult on a organizational change. And the thing I want to talk about in this slide is also about the matter that we've put here unbelief between brackets, because all of these statements actually are belief statements. You can also have a very strong belief that something will not succeed, that something will fail. And as we will show you later on this presentation, that belief that something will not fail, that faith, that belief is so strong that it will actually fail, because you will start only see evidence of that failing in practice for yourself. Your brain works in a way that it will help you to see the points of failure. So all of these statements are actually statements of belief. And that's an interesting dynamic to start to recognize when thinking about change. So when unpacking these belief statements, we were thinking about what would that mean then? So if we're talking about driver, belief, action, and just to give it a recognizable abbreviation, we've used the one for volume, DBA. We started thinking about what would happen if you were turn up or influence or talk about that level of belief as a crucial component towards ownership. And then we came to the conclusion that belief is actually the defining ingredient to ownership. So the level of ownership that you take needs to match your level of belief. So what that means, if you have a very low level of belief in the organizational change you're being proposed, let's say you are working in a team as a business analyst and your manager comes to you and says, listen, we got this new awesome thing, it's called Agile, and we're going to work Scrum, and you're going to be a product owner tomorrow because we feel that's the best fit for you as a business analyst. You're working with stakeholders, right? So that's perfect for you. So let's do that. And then as you are listening to this person, your brain starts serving up all these belief statements about the last change that you were part of and that didn't work out, or the future of why you are a business analyst and all of a sudden you're now a product owner. Is that the same thing or something different? Or all these questions influence the way that you perceive and take action and set your driver for that change. So really the level of ownership is really the match to your level of belief. And if you don't tune that ownership to the level of belief in your organizational change, then you're setting yourself up for failure. So to make that point a bit more clear, we've tried to think about three different types of levels of belief, or levels of this balance between these 3 points. So we thought of, just to make things a bit more funny, or at least a bit more agreeable to you, without getting all into a big schematic or a model. What would that look like if you were to have enormous amount of belief, for instance, but not a big amount of driver or action to go with that? Or maybe the other way around, you would have lots of action, you would really emphasize that in your ownership balance, but not much of the others. So bear with us if we're going to present these three types of people to you, and tell us whether this comes across as something natural or true to you. Let's take the first
type
person.
Of behavior, right?
Yes,
It's
type of
it's
behavior,
what you
definitely.
see. Yeah.
And I apologize in advance if anybody is called Nick or any other of the types of people that we're going to use. That's beside the point. So let's say you have a person in your organization who has a strong level of belief, but not much of the driver or the action. What would that look like? So a person with a strong level of belief would come up to you and say, listen, I went to this conference. It was all about Agile. It was called 3.0. I know, crazy 3.0, but there were some excellent ideas in there. And I think I found the answer to making our organizations work. We have a terrible time in the market. We can really up our game here. So I strongly believe in this. And this person knows how to bring that focus towards himself and the belief statement that he's making. But if you look past that, there's very little action, skin in the game we were just talking about. So that person is not involved himself or affected by any of the changes. And there is very little emphasis on the driver. So he would say, let's leave it up to other people. I'm more about the big belief statements and the ideas. And probably in a few months or so, there will be a new big belief coming around the corner about the new idea and into change. That would constitute for us this type of person, or this type of behavior, we should say, indeed. So what would that look like for the second person of the three? So that would mean person has a strong driver, big plans, but not a lot of action or belief to boot. So you can recognize this person as being, as we quoted in the title, very neurotic. So lots of plans, lots of Kanban boards, a lot of post-its, lots of things to do, plan, make schedules, make sure that everybody adheres to the work and everybody is being planned in. And if you look behind that veil of having a large driver, then you would see a lot less belief in what that person is actually doing. So they would believe that if you have an excellent driver, if you just execute everything that's on the board, if you get everything done on the board, then change would be executed. But in their heart of hearts, they don't actually believe in it, and they fail to take on the action that's also part of that ownership. So finally, we come to that third person, and we have labeled that type of behavior as being the adrenaline junkie. So what that person would have is that last bit of action. Whatever you're saying, maybe also in combination for us that we found out is with a Nick the Narcissist kind of type of behavior. You have I'm influenced by your plans, by your belief. I really believe in what you're saying. So let's get all into action. Let's just work at it. Let's do this stuff. And let's tick everything in the box and let's get going. I'm a fan of this. I'm enthusiastic of this. We'll think about the plan later on. We just have to get into action mode and do that stuff. And what that leads is to a whole lot of fluff, a lot of things get done all over the place, but not really a plan to boot. And if you look behind it, also not really a belief that those actions will then constitute a real positive change.
This is most of the time the person who initiates 14 different projects.
There you go.
So if you now feel like, crap, maybe this is me, it could be. The answer to the question that you can ask yourself is actually, am I believing what I'm doing? But most of the time, that adrenaline junkie is owner of multiple projects. They don't really have a clear view on where they stand with the projects. And as soon as it becomes really fake for them, for them as well, they will start the next project.
Yes. Yes.
Interesting behavior.
Yeah, and I feel like we have come across maybe, and of course, maybe I overemphasize this, but just to make sure these types of behavior, trying to make it as black and white as possible, just to make this point. So you might recognize some of this behavior for yourself or some other people in the organization. And what that for us brings back is tune that level of ownership to the level of belief that you have. So what that means, in conclusion, that you would see that if you have a small level of belief, maybe due to the fact that you have been in change initiatives for 20 years or so in your career, and many of them have joined the 74% of organizational changes initiatives that have failed, tune that level of ownership to the amount of belief. So if you have a small level of belief, then you would probably be best served with a smaller driver and a smaller bit of action. Maybe a shorter pilot to see if something actually works. Build your belief that that change or the things that you are doing will actually help you in the end. And if you have lots of belief, obviously, then you can also match your driver and action to that. So that would constitute that volume of ownership. Is very important to think about. So if you see this picture on the left, you have too much of the driver and action there to match the level of belief that you would have, which would then in turn lead to some of this toxic behavior we were talking before in the last slide.
It's every time finding the balance between all three elements that creates the highest value of ownership. So we hear you. We hear you now thinking, cool, so if I only believe, or if I only make my CEO believe in this, then we're all good to go and we've got everything covered. If it was this easy, we as in Bartwin and myself wouldn't be the people who came up with this, probably. The fact is, why it becomes so difficult is that your brain is playing a really challenging game with you. And in order to guide you through that, why it is so hard for individuals to change, and therefore in organizations as well, is if you see what your brain is doing, you will get a clearer understanding of why this is so hard. So first of all, motivated reasoning. This is one of the games that your brain plays. As soon as we start off a project or a change initiative and it either fails or it is a success, what we do automatically is we make a picture perfect version of our own behavior. So at the beginning of the presentation, when we first started, I asked you what to grade yourself in your previous projects, your productivity and effort. It wouldn't be surprising if you grade yourself higher than you would grade your team members. And that has often to do with the motivated reasoning effects. The game that your brain plays is basically, it goes into protection mode. So every single human being is processed and organized from a protection mode, a survival mode. With that, there is lots of stuff going on in your brain, and I won't go into details right now, but it makes sure that as soon as it starts to feel any sort of threat towards yourself, it will create a different version of the world, where it becomes your motivated reasoning, where your brain says, well, you've done a really good job actually, because you worked more than 40 hours last week, and your colleague, on the other hand, did choose to work from home at the moment that it was actually needed that he or she was in the office. So what your brain is doing is making a reality around the fact that you tried your best, but it was somebody else who lacked. And that somebody else can also be something else. So also a department or a tool that got you into trouble, that kind of stuff. It doesn't have to be a person as well. This thing, and this is why it is so hard. Your brain does this in your subconscious level. So in your subconscious level, the whole activation around I detect fear, or I feel there is some sort of danger and I go into protection mode, we don't clearly notice that. If we would notice that, we will probably react in different ways than we are actually doing in the fundamentals of behavior and dysfunctional behavior that you show in a sort of situation where you feel fear, where you detect fear. And this is the other game that your brain plays, is the illusion of objectivity. So the motivated reasoning makes a realistic view of you being a superhero in your projects, whereas somebody else in your team is not so much, and that's the reason why it failed. The illusion of objectivity is a game that your brain plays to actually make sure that whatever your subconscious is reacting towards, it is translated in something more realistic for your conscious mind. So if it would be that your subconscious makes something up in the motivated reasoning where you actually become the superhero and you fly through the office, your conscious will definitely know that that is not near any reality. So the illusion of objectivity makes actually sure that whatever it is that is coming from motivated reasoning is created in a world that it actually makes sense. And because it makes sense for us conscious-wise, we start to actually believe that we did the right thing. And then there's a third game that comes into place, and this is making every single change initiative so complex to actually change your behavior or change your beliefs. And that is the confirmation bias, which probably most of you will all know. What it does is, as soon as your subconscious creates a belief, and that belief is created by a defense mechanism to protect yourself from any fear or danger or anxiety around you, you will start looking for evidence that backs up your belief. So one of the questions that I asked when we started off was, did you actually think the project would be a success, yes or no, from the first moment you start off? Most of the time, you have a really clear belief in that. Either you believe this is going to be a success, or you believe that it's not going to happen. Your subconscious makes it really black and white. Your conscious makes it really grayish area. What happened as soon as we see the results coming in? So for example, say your project has failed, your motivated reasoning kicks in, you tried your best, it was somebody or something else that was creating the failure. The illusion of objectivity makes it a reality for you, something that you actually understand can happen and is close to real life. You start looking for evidence that is actually backing up that belief. So suddenly you find the data that this is the reason why your project failed. You find the data that I read an article that Scrum Masters need to be full-time Scrum Masters instead of part-time. Our organizations chose to do it part-time roles. See, that's why we failed. This is something, it is all automated in your brain. We don't do it step by step. We don't do the whole inspect and adapt kind of thing. This is a really quick process. And this is what's making these three games into action in your brain on a neuroscience level. That this is why it is so extremely hard to actually change behavior, change motivation. So before we go into case study, so this is what Bartwin and I saw during lots of engagements, and where we talked about it as well when we did the interviews for this concept that we created, is that lots of people that we spoke on project level, they all were doing this. Lots of management were doing this as well. CEOs who came from a different organization first, that where the agile transformation was a huge success, they stepped in a new organization with the big belief, it's going to happen, I've been there, this is going to be it. As soon as they saw it failing towards a level that goes beyond their own skin in the game part, they would come up with proof like, see, this HR didn't really get involved, they didn't want to do the whole restructuring, so that's why we didn't happen. Lots of the time Agile is connected to reorganizing, redundancy, and that kind of stuff. Lots of leadership teams use that as a proof that it either will be a success or it will fail. And this is something, if you are aware of it, you start to recognize the behavior in your teams, in your organization as well, especially what Bartwin mentioned before with the three key rules, the narcissists, the adrenaline junkies, the neurotics. That kind of behavior, if you can spot that, that's where you actually can ask the questions to yourself, or actually to the person if you're there to do that. What is their belief, what is their action, what is their skin in the game, what is actually their plan? And that becomes a really cool case actually to find out. So we've tried this, and that's where the case study comes in. So Bartwin has a really cool example around the case study that we did around this concept, so around the volume of leadership and ownership, around the belief, the drive, and the actions. So Bartwin.
Yeah, thanks. So I was involved with a organizational change, and we were looking at the purpose statement, the vision statement of the company, and some of the values also connected. So we would like to bring this case study as an idea of working with belief statements, how it changes your way of thinking, and what would that look like. So this is the purpose of said company. So if you look at this purpose, fine purpose, really good purpose, nothing wrong with that. And then if you look at the values of that company, also good. So there's nothing in here. I'm sort of answering it for you guys, but I can't imagine that you think like we delight, that can't be a good value. So these values are great values, and they were also being acted upon within the company. So nothing wrong with those values is my statement. But then we started looking or talking about belief statements. So what do we as a company actually believe? And what it came down to were these 4 belief statements. So rather than making a value or a vision statement coupled with values, corporate values that everybody needed to memorize somehow or feel like it's being enacted within the company, we came to these 4 belief statements. So we actually said, as a company, we believe that people should be at the core. And we believe in the power of partnership. And we believe in creating value in all that we do. And we believe technology is there to serve people. So what would that actually mean if we start to say we believe this? So what I noticed as a facilitator in coaching the session is that it sort of changed everything, the dynamic within the group on how they perceive things. So just by starting to use the language in their communication of belief, the we believe, something changed for them in the way that they start to think about, yeah, but if I'm working in this company, what do we actually believe? And if we do believe that people should be at the core, how does that affect our HR policy? How does that affect the way that we approach cross-functional working for a new client? What does that actually mean then? If we put people at the core and it sort of hurts the people that work in the company, overwork time or any other way, then we should change that, because this is part of our belief in the company. And same goes for all the four belief statements. So what it did was that it brought things back to the core. Instead of saying we have a core value, we delight, and what that means is that we are customer obsessed, so we focus on the customer as much as we can, and we try to always go the extra mile for the clients. So that would constitute that value of we delight, with then that value being part of one of five that would build towards the mission. So that whole dynamic changed to breaking it down to 4 easy belief statements.
And actually also on team level as well.
Yeah, so that then turned out as a trigger to change things on team level, how we could overcome or look across service lines, and how we started to serve our clients. And also, so as an example, the power of partnership, meaning if you have a client that can't, that is in trouble due to the COVID crisis, would you still help them? Or would you say, listen, we are bound by contract, and if you don't pay, then we're not going to help you? Or is it more in the power of partnership to say, if we believe in this as a company, the power of partnership, we're going to take that conscious choice to wait on payment for a bit and still help you in the meantime, because you're in need of help in this time of crisis. So, as you're thinking about this case study, I would like to invite you to think about your own belief statements. So what are the things, if you're looking back on your own company you work at, maybe as a consultant or a coach, or you're working on a change or doing anything, what would be your own personal statement of belief when it comes to change, for instance? And if you do write that statement down or thinking about that statement right now, what kind of brain games do you notice? Because our brain is such an integral part of our being that instantly your brain will start to think or change or influence or pivot the way you're thinking about that belief statement. Maybe your brain is in protection mode because the last time you were part of a organizational change, it didn't work out so well for you or the people around you. And you have a personal statement that you value people over process, and all the organizational change did was bring about a bigger process in your company. So this current change you're in right now, your brain is protecting you and thinking about that change and already trying to find the evidence that that will also bring about another process in your company. Just to give an example. So the statements that we're trying to come across for you is that as much as our brain would like to play games and maybe turn the attention towards somebody else, so it is not as much on yourself or any other brain game that you can think about, it's in the end all about you. If you want to take some ownership of that change, that would mean that it's about you, about the level of belief that you have and the level of driver and action that you connect to those things.
Yeah. And the funny thing is when Bartwin and I were going through this process around what is the reason why change initiatives are often more likely to fail than actually be a success, we noticed that although we now formulate it around organizational change, it is actually all about you, and it reflects in every single thing that we discussed today. It reflects on you individually. So if you take out the whole organizational context, think about what you as an individual try to change in your behavior or in your habits. And we've all have these New Year's resolutions. For some, it's going more often to the gym, or it's eating healthier. We all do it for a few weeks and then suddenly it doesn't stick anymore. That is also your volume of ownership turning around upside down the whole time. Because if you look back on such a situation where, for example, you made a promise to yourself, I'm going more often to the gym. You will probably make it happen for a few weeks, and then suddenly it lowers down to maybe not go anymore. Like I've been there as well, got a annual contract with the gym, and by the end I just spent, I think, a month or something like that at the gym. And Bartwin and I had this conversation like on our personal levels as well. What is it that we actually have as soon as we are actually changing our behaviors and our ways of thinking? And that is the key, that something else makes you believe it's more important. So that could be the fact that you choose subconsciously already to choose to spend more time with your kids instead of going to the gym. And it starts off by just a Tuesday night that you spend a time with your kids, and before you know it, it becomes every single night. There's a reason you wanted to read this book, you wanted to read this article, or you want to watch a Netflix series. And that's where it becomes really interesting, because when we discussed previously the three behaviors, the three personalities, that is you in every single situation. So you dial up your ownership depending if you believe it, if you have a clear driver on how to achieve goals, and what kind of actions you're actually taking or not, what your skin in the game is. And depending on the situation and depending on that belief, you will see it changes your attitude and your actions towards making it happen, yes or no. And what we want to do is, and we'll close up by this, is to actually not only focus on organizational change, but organizational change can only happen if you start to change your ways of thinking and your behavior. So make your belief statements also on an individual level. Start there. Start to research what the brain game is that you see yourself doing. Now that you're aware of it, you will see sort of stuff that you are actually saying to other people or that you are doing. It is depending and intertwined with the brain games that your brain is actually letting you play. So we think, to summarize everything up, we think lots of organizations focus on organizational change based on having a driver, having a roadmap, where to go, setting the goals and the milestones, and create an action plan how to get there. That for us is a strong part, but it's what is missing to actually create ownership in your organization is the part where the belief kicks in. Whether you believe it or not, that will affect your driver, that will affect your actions, and that will affect your behavior as well. So being aware of those three elements that need to balance out every single time in every single situation, try to figure out what you actually believe. Deep dive into that thought of, is this going to happen? Is this going to be a success? And as soon as you become more self-aware around the fact what you actually believe, take a look around in your team, whether it's your leadership team or it is the team that you're working in or that you're managing, and see what kind of behaviors you see shaping up there. What kind of words, what kind of language does your team uses? And those key elements will start to make you have a clear understanding whether or not it's a belief or a driver or a lack of action in the game of ownership. So balance it. And as soon as you balance your belief, your drive, and your action, you create a perfect spot for your ownership. So this is what we think, well, not think, if we are talking about belief, this is actually what we believe is key in change, whether it's your personal change or organizational change. And we coach at the moment a lot of executive teams around letting go of the organizational change around your drive, and first start off by actually believe. Do you believe what you're trying to do? Do you believe you're in the right setting, the right time, the right moment? And we would like to challenge you to take that way of thinking and looking at ownership in your organization and to yourself, and see if you can find your perfect volume of ownership. So this was our talk. If you want, and before we go to the Q&A, Bartwin and I are writing a book about this. So if you want to know more, either contact on LinkedIn, we'll keep you updated. But for now, we're really curious for any questions or comments,
Yes.
anything else that you guys think or heard or saw during our presentation.
I think I saw a few questions in the chat.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and start from the very top, and I'll read it out loud.
Yeah,
sure.
Doesn't vision come before even a roadmap to align everyone in the team?
Yes. Yes, it does.
Yeah. It's a
Yes,
really
it does.
easy answer. Yes, it does. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I think actually when you're looking at a vision, you're on the path for that belief statement.
Can you force people to have skin in the game, and how do you recommend creating that condition?
Yeah, that's a great question. So trying to force skin in the game. So no, of course, forcing somebody to do stuff is obviously not good. I do get the feeling that you want to make sure that another person is invested as much as you are. I guess maybe that's a better word for skin in the game. And the proper way to go about that is just to ask another person about that level of investment that he or she has in that change. So what that means is if a CEO starts talking about an organizational change, it would be a fair question to say, so what's your level of skin or involvement into this change? How are you being affected or working with or adding to the value of this change? So that would be a first suggestion to do, to open up that discussion. And it's perfectly normal if anybody asks you to change or be involved in a change, like, how does it affect everybody? How are we together involved in making this change a reality?
We have another one. How do you probe for and test for belief?
Oh, good question. What we saw during the interviews and research that we've done, unfortunately, there is not a clear test that you can do whether or not somebody believes it. It is most of the time what we saw a use of language. So what you often hear is like, okay, I hear you, but what are you going to do? Or, you know, we can do, like, this is what we get a lot, like, okay, so we're implementing a Scrum framework, a Scrum way of working, but in the end, we're all doing a really good job, but we're not actually making a change because leadership is not there. Leadership is not on board. So blame management is a really big thing when it comes to transformations in organizations. It's always the management that didn't do it or not involved enough. So often you hear it from the language that people are using. You can actually see it in behavior and in posture and in attitude as well. So people who are, like, you all know it, like close postures, that kind of stuff. But what we experience, and that is what Bartwin told in the case study, to actually do a workshop, and it takes time, but do a workshop around what people believe, what is actually there, and to write up some questions. Do you believe in this change? Do you think we can make it happen? Do you think we have the right people involved? Do you think other people in our organization are actually well aware why we are doing that? So starting off with asking a lot of questions that deep dive more into what people are thinking. That is the first stage. So pay attention to language, and ask questions, start the conversation.
I would add also to that, because I just saw a follow up from that person in the chat, that it would also be exhibited in behavior, and so in actions of that person. So I totally agree with that. Obviously, it's not just only communication; it's also about the action that that person undertakes. So that brings us back to that skin in the game. So if you are not partaking in anything of the change, not being affected by any of that change, not doing yourself anything about that change, you probably don't believe anything about that change.
You're on mute, Catherine.
Oh, sorry. Okay, it keeps on going on mute. All right, this one's from Andreas. How might we make sense out of change that is based on some assumptions of what leaders think that should be changed? Leaders not doing any Gemba walks or connected to daily business, but designing it in ivory towers or buying it from external consultants with best practice attitudes.
Yeah, good one. Very
So
real
that's
life
more
example.
of a statement than a question, but that's true. Yep.
Yeah, it is something that's so realistic, right? The fact that you actually mention it, Andreas, is probably because a lot of us will recognize this. Again, for me, it is a gap between the driver, the actions, and the belief as well. I think leadership that often initiates a change in an organization, but keeps it really high level and not really concerned or focused on who is actually doing the change, that it creates a lack of skin in the game on different levels. And I think if you focus on that and actually have that type of conversations with leadership to get them more involved and to actually understand, like, we don't know what we don't know, and often that's the case with C-suite level. They are so busy, they don't have time or energy or effort to actually understand what is going on the lower level in their organization. That doesn't mean they don't want to know, and that doesn't mean they don't believe that they should know it or not know it. But to get that connection with them instead of doing the blame management, because that's the whole motivation bias brain game, of course, right? So it's a really good reason to actually not change anything on yourself or in your team because leadership isn't involved or connected. So I think your statement is completely true. It shows already that there is a lack of belief from the individual side, but also a lack of skin in the game to actually get involved into changing something.
All right, next one from Brian. Totally get what you're saying in small to medium-sized companies, but how do you do this at a large scale? What do you do in organizations with 8,000 plus folks?
Yeah, good one. I think the size of a company doesn't really matter. The concept stays the same. Yes, it becomes way more complex to do it. I would say I don't actually know what your view on this is, Bartwin, but I will share my view, and you can reply or add or ignore it, whatever you choose to do. But what I often see in organizations, so I worked within big organizations like that as well. Change initiatives start at a really small part of the organization. It's either a few teams, it's either one department, and as some kind of oil stain, it dribbles down or up, whatever you want to see it from what point, towards a bigger part of the organization. The whole concept, the whole brain game, and the 3 behaviors that we talked about, that is, whether you work with 10 people or whether you work with 8,000 people, it's still there. And I think if you gradually just work from that, and to be honest, if you can reach that executive level in your organization with more than 8,000 employees, I think that's a good start to actually test what their belief is, what their skin in the game is, apart from getting a good bonus, yes or no, but to actually understand that better will help you to implement a change initiative on a lower level in the organization.
Right.
Thank you.
So the one thing I would like to add to that is, if you're talking about scaling up, so let's say you have a small company, 20 people versus a international company of 8,000 people, you would have 8,000 times people with that level of ownership and a variety of brain games going on. So obviously that's a lot more to contend with than just having a small company of 20 people, which you're trying to align their level of ownership together. So if you want to deal with this topic in a 8,000 people company, then that would still mean that you would have to start, the same principles apply, but then you would have to acknowledge the fact that you are scaling at such a big organization that you need to take a small amount and start to change and talk about that amount and have that grow the level of belief within the company, instead of let's try and do 8,000 people at once.
Awesome, thank you. So next one is the message here more about personal belief or creating belief in others?
Good question.
Well, personal belief first, I would say. It's all about you still. So that if you're talking about ownership, that ownership starts with you. You can't say, I'm going to take ownership, but 20 other people do. So that would be the first response I would have to that. And if anything, I think in this presentation, or what we're trying to bring across, is not you need to follow this, or this is the new thing that you would need to adhere to. This is about starting a discussion about ownership, because we feel that is the part that will make change work. And then challenge yourself to think about these brain games that are going on for you and that you recognize within the organization, and how do these ingredients to ownership apply here. And maybe there are more ingredients to that ownership. So it's the start of that discussion and talking about the level of belief that we're trying to get across, instead of trying to say you need to influence others to believe.
Yeah, I totally agree indeed. I think also what we stand for as consultants ourselves, a lot of articles, a lot of blogs and personal opinions around ownership is the fact that we come in organizations where often the conversation goes like, the teams need to take their ownership, or leadership need to take their ownership. And the thing is, you cannot make people take ownership. The only thing is that you can create and support an environment where people feel they can create their own ownership. And that makes it a clear understanding that it begins with you, with yourself. So your personal belief, if you can turn the volume up and down around the belief and the drive in your actions, and if you can do that for yourself, and you get a better self-awareness around how you act in those type of situations, that's where you actually can be way more supportive for others in your team or in your organizations to support their thinking as well.
All right, we got a good question from Karen. If probably everyone is going through this, how are you two as consultants able to work with everyone?
That's why they pay us the big bucks, right? So
world domination. Well, yeah, I would love to work with everyone, but I can't. For me personally, it was an extreme eye-opening conversation, multiple conversations to actually have with Bartwin and with leadership and management and teams during this research around our book and our thoughts and belief around ownership. That it actually got me thinking, why am I doing something? So why am I changing my behavior or not changing my behavior? And I started to focus, and I'm doing this already for a long time. So I make it really clear in every organization that I come in to support them in their transformation, that I am definitely not the person who's going to transform your organization. I'm not the one who's going to change your organization. The only thing I do is to show people a different insight, to show people a different way of thinking that enables them either to really think about their own behavior or think about what they could add to the organization or to the team. And that's basically the only thing I can do. And I hope the more we as all consultants and everyone involved in an organization are becoming more self-aware around this facts and around the behaviors, the dysfunctional behaviors and where it comes from, the better we can help each other. Sounds really fluffy now that I'm saying it out loud, but I think it's true.
Yeah,
We have
agreed.
another insightful question. Oh, sorry, Bartwin, were you?
Yeah, go on. I was just saying I agree with what Marcella was saying. So
we have another insightful question. So a startup founder or company has the driver, the belief in his or her idea, skin in the game, works in agile ways, takes all the action and a lot more, but majority of the startups fail, probably as high as the 74% stats you shared. With this example, the DBA concept you presented fails. Any thoughts?
Oh boy.
Good one.
No, good one. Yeah, I think actually for startups, the percentage may be even higher in the first year of existence of that company, right? So many of those companies fail in the first year. What I found out is I myself have been part of I've had a few companies of my own, so I feel like I can relate to this question. Maybe some of the struggles that starting entrepreneurs have is that they have a bias that their product or service that they thought of is the best in the world. And people will instantly flock to their new idea and buy that product. And when times do get a bit tough, then you maybe can suffer from the bias of thinking, right, so I just need to work harder, put more money into marketing or go to meetups or whatever you think of, and then it will work. So what I'm trying to sort of allude to is that you maybe starting entrepreneurs can suffer a bit more than traditional companies from these biases and brain games that have you seek out evidence, or your brain seeks out and labels evidence that you are on the right track, maybe ignoring other sound information that you need to pivot or change or do something else, which would then lead to that failure of that small company or that startup company. So I don't know. So this would be my answer to that question. I don't know if that is the truth, but that is how I would see this DBA concept applied to this context.
I think so as well, to keep in mind that we are not saying that this is a guaranteed success for change. It is what we saw during the test runs that we did and sort of workshops, like the belief statement workshops and stuff. It is okay to believe something won't work, but we are pushed into a way of thinking in organizations that we only speak up about the fact we are going for success and we're going to make this happen. And it is shown as something negative as soon as we start doubting the fact that is it actually going to be a success, and opening up the conversation around the fact that people can speak up, I don't believe this is going to be a success. That is where we actually can have a solid conversation around the fact, okay, so you don't believe, what is the element that you don't believe? It's either the resources or the people involved or the amount of budget. But then we can actually have a good talk around, a good discussion around, okay, where does that unbelief come from, or where does that strong belief for success come from, so that we at least can make sure that we get aligned and we understand each other's point of view, we understand each other's paradigm that we all live in, to actually make steps, to actually create the skin in the game and to work together. So I think that is key. We're not saying this is your guaranteed mix for success, and if you fail, that clearly states that you don't believe in it. So just to make that really clear. That
Great
we
question
don't
though.
believe
Really
that.
like all the
Yeah, really
questions.
good.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Another question, what practical example can you provide of the behaviors and mental models of an employee before and after you worked with them and what you did to enable them to transition?
Oh, good. When I worked for a large telecom company in the Netherlands, I was coaching, I was doing a big IT transformation. So it was like 14 teams, and one of the teams was an infrastructure team. And what I saw happening there was basically a really strong view around not believing this is going to work. So they were hesitant in the ways of working. They were blaming management and leadership. They were not involved, so why should we do anything? So it was really strong language. It was really strong behaviors that you saw that they didn't really believe that they needed to do anything to make it work. The brain games that we discussed was what was really shown was confirmation bias. They will come up with the data to actually support their own beliefs. So because leadership wasn't available during this meeting, we made a decision, and that decision turned out to actually the failure, but that was because leadership didn't came to the meeting. So they came with the whole confirmation bias of getting the data and the evidence around their belief. What I did with the team was actually to not focus on the more company-wide overview, but to actually bring the change into their own lives and in their own small team environment. So I started coaching them on forget about your organization. What is it that you as a team, that were with 4 people, what is it that you guys want to achieve? What will make you really happy if you can change that? And they came up with really small bits and pieces. It took a while though. They came up with a lot. Management need to change, management need to do this. But in the end, we came up with a small list of some actions that they said, well, if we can change that, if we can make that happen, that will actually work for us. So we started to make a driver, so plan towards success. We started to make the actions. We checked on, do you guys believe you can make this happen? Do you need anything? Do you need support or budget or that kind of stuff? Because it was so small and team related, they were good to go. They didn't have to have a lot of outside support. And when we actually reach the moments of success, and I think that's also key to actually acknowledge, the more moments of success, the more the belief starts to change. So they were definitely tuning up their volume up and down. So their actions were showing that they could make success and they could change something. And therefore they started to believe that they were actually able to change something. And I think after 2 or 3 months that I was coaching that team, one of the team members came to me and he said, like, before you came in, I was running into a burnout. I was taking my work home. I was having tons of lists around me for work and tasks that I needed to pick up, and I couldn't deal with that. And now that we're actually getting the support around what can we change as a team, it became way more clearer. They embraced the new ways of working that the organization chose to implement, and they made it their own. And I think that was, for me, a really key insight, that it's not around the framework you choose. It's not around having the most coolest presentation from your CEO, how awesome it is that we need to change, but actually to make it a lower level, more individual focused change, that it actually became their belief that they could do something within the organization and they could influence and change behaviors with others and towards others. So that was, for me, a really eye-opening.
Would you like to hear a short example? Anyways, the example I was trying to do, was thinking of, was for a small team, cross-functional team. They were talking about the velocity that they had over the couple of sprints. It's pretty much the same every time. And then one person said, how about we do double the amount of the work that we usually do? And then instantly you would hear the belief statements come up from team members like, what are you crazy? This is not what we historically been able to do. Other people said, this sounds great, let's do it, let's go for it. And in the end, long story short, we decided to take on this challenge, to do that, to see if we could make it. We estimated the belief in the group. So everybody said, yes, I think we believe we can do this, we should go for this, lined up the plan and made sure that the stakeholders were aware, and then went to work. And during that sprint, you would see many times that belief being under attack or being part of brain games, like if it would have a setback or anything else. And then the team would rally up and say, yes, but we said, we believe that we can do this. And they went to work and made an enormous impact, and they created way more value than they did before. It was such an interesting example to see how that ownership worked, and also how that impacted then, that impact lasted for many sprints, and they were way more engaged to what they were doing by this challenge that they took on.
All right, thank you. So it's about 3 minutes till the end of this session. I think that's a good place to stop. Does anyone else have any questions?
Send me an email, or Marcella an email, or reach out.
LinkedIn.
I'm sure we can answer that question.
Yeah, and if anyone has any additional questions, you can also feel free to send them over at contact@expertagile.club, and then we'll make sure to forward them to our guest speakers today.
Thanks for the questions. Great questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Awesome. Thanks.
Yep, these are our social pages. Feel free to follow us and connect with us on there for more updates and for more information.